Hey there YouTube, my name's Yaryanwen. I'm a special kind of nerd, and today I am going to talk about self-injury, also known as self-harm, or sometimes as self-mutilation, although as I will describe in this video, self-mutilation is, in my mind, more of a subset of self-injury or self-harm, due to the fact that, mutilation implies more extreme forms of physical violence to the self, and things that mutilate and disfigure leave more scars, leave more marks, which some self-injury people, practitioners, it's probably not the right word for it, try to avoid. So, I was prompted to make this by Coughlin's excellent video on the same subject. That's linked in the description box. You should check it out if you haven't seen it already. When I first started using the technique that became my first self-injury technique, it was actually not as what most people would consider self-injury, and it was a actually very healthy means of dealing with immediate physical pain. So if I scraped my knee, twisted my ankle, and especially if after getting some kind of cut or scrape had to have a first aid treatment applied, where I needed to, kind of stay still, not flinch away, not have that gut instinct reaction of kicking my first aider in the face because they were doing something that hurt me, I would make a fist, dig my fingernails into the palm of my hand, and the pain that caused in my hand allowed me to focus on the pain I was causing myself, which I had complete control over, so that I could then ignore the other pain just by making the pain in my hand a little bit more intense for a brief amount of time while someone dealt with tending to an injury. I could not pay attention to that injury and made things a little bit easier. So, when I first started experiencing body memories as part of my post-traumatic stress syndrome, I started using the same technique in order to try to distract myself from that. Now, if you're not familiar, body memories are a type of flashback, similar to other flashbacks, where when you've experienced a traumatic event, when you're in the traumatic event, your brain does not process the information that's going on. It takes things in, but it doesn't actually deal with them. And that lack of understanding, that confusion, is part of what causes post-traumatic stress syndrome. And so once you are in a safe place, or your brain determines that you're in a safe place, or that it just can't do other stuff anymore, it will start to attempt to process this information, which it thinks is going to be helpful, but that's not necessarily the case. So, other kinds of flashbacks that people experience will include visual hallucinations, hearing things, basically reliving traumatic experiences, being convinced that they are back in the place where they were when that trauma happened to them. So, with body memories, what that is a physical sensation flashback. So if, for example, your trauma included someone grabbing your arm, the neurons in your brain would fire so that you were actually feeling that physical sensation of someone grabbing your arm, even though it wasn't happening in the present moment. You re-experience those physical sensations as though they are happening right now, even though they're not. They can also be accompanied by visual and auditory hallucinations for a complete flashback experience, but sometimes it's just the physical, just like sometimes it's just the auditory or the visual, and physical is the type of flashback that I experience most. So when that first started happening, I had no fucking idea what was happening. I had very much not acknowledged my initial trauma, which was a childhood trauma, to myself. And it wasn't actually until after my second trauma that occurred when I was 19 that I did acknowledge it. And so when this started to occur, which actually was when I became sexually active, when I was 17, I had no fucking idea what was going on. I was extremely scared of it, of these really weird things that I was feeling in my body at really weird and inappropriate times. And I started using that same distraction technique of making myself feel something physical in my hand in order to not feel those other things. However, when you're experiencing something that is intensely emotional as well as physically painful, and also when it can happen for sometimes hours at a time, just with your brain cycling through the same sensations over and over and over and over again, it's not sufficient to just, do that little bit of pain. More pressure was required, and it started to result in bruising and, on occasion, breaking the skin and drawing blood. And then people started noticing these little crescent-shaped bruises and scabs on my hands. So when that happened, I moved locations, started doing it on parts of my body that were generally covered by clothing. So that was a thing. And then because there was emotional upset involved in that as well, it also became something that kind of slipped over into being used to attempt to distract myself anytime that I was feeling sad, that I was feeling anxious. And when I say sad, I don't just mean like normal sad, I mean like depression sad, like sobbing, crying uncontrollably, I can't stop. But if I somehow causing myself physical pain could actually calm me down, because then if I was able to switch my focus to the physical pain, then if I stopped it, then I could stop. So that was kind of a thing. At one point, through my counseling, I thought, when I eventually found out what I had, which was actually the result of talking to another person who had post-traumatic stress syndrome and not a diagnosis that I received from a doctor. I received over a dozen different diagnoses. I have also been specifically told that I did not have every single one of those things. Initially, I diagnosed myself with post-traumatic stress syndrome, and it was when I went to the first doctor and basically sort of lied and said that that was what... I didn't say that I had been diagnosed with it by a doctor, but I just informed that physician that that was what I had, and that was when I actually started receiving proper treatment. I later admitted that it was a self-diagnosis, and, her response was, well, it was correct, so it doesn't matter. But anyways, at one point I thought that I had stopped self-injuring, but it turns out that actually I had switched forms. I had figured out that I had admitted to the physical and knew that this was a problem, knew that it was continuing to escalate, knew that it was a thing. I never did anything that resulted in scar. I have a couple of really small scars, but nothing big, and nothing that would be identifiable as being from self-injury. I've got worse scars from things that weren't self-injury. But I moved into basically a form of psychological self-injury. And one of the main things that I did with that was watch a lot of crime show type things, such as Law and Order Special Victims Unit. Particularly, all of the Law and Orders, really. And I'm on a over 2-year ban from watching any of those shows. Even if it's an old episode that I've already seen, I'm not allowed to watch movies with certain kinds of content, just because it's hard on me, and it's also was getting really fucking hard on my partner to deal with the aftermath of me constantly triggering and re-traumatizing myself by exposing myself to this shit. So it's interesting because with the psychological self-injury, it was partly hurting myself, or it was resulting in hurting myself through the triggering and the re-traumatizations. But part of what it was trying to do was desensitize myself by sort of flooding myself with so many stories of sexual assault that it diminished the pain of my own. That kind of failed because it just made me feel shittier about the world in general. It was attempting to be a little bit of vicarious justice, to see sexual offenders punished, to see cops who actually cared about victims, which was not something that I had experienced either for myself or for other people who I knew who had experienced sexual assaults. So it was very, it was trying to have that sort of vicarious sense of these things can go well, but A, and not in all of the episodes does that happen, and B, I just would actually get really angry because it pissed me off that people were getting the impression from these TV shows that the bad guys get caught and that the cops are all compassionate when that wasn't my experience. And it made me angry to think, A, why didn't I and the people that I knew who had suffered this get that experience? And B, that there were people out there in the general public who hadn't experienced anything, but who assumed that if someone was a real survivor of this kind of event, that they would have gotten those resources just kind of automatically, and that therefore it wasn't as much of a problem because there was this big safety net to catch you, and it was bullshit. And then the final and worst reason that I would watch stuff was actually to belittle myself. And in much the same way that people will tell someone with depression, what the fuck do you have to be sad about? There's people in refugee camps. They've got it way worse than you. You've got a house and food and blah, 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 and you're just selfish and spoiled and you've got nothing to be sad about. I was just basically trying to tell myself there are way worse stories. And I got some of those from media, but honestly the media wasn't being horrible enough, so I connected with some other survivors and read people's blogs and stuff, which, I mean, they had every right to write them, but I should not have been reading them, because I was doing it to hurt myself. Anyway, I'm going to sign off. I'm just about out of time, and I'm getting a little bit agitated, so I might do a follow-up in a bit. If you have any questions, post them. Have a great day.